Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. Hello, my lovely. I hope you are doing well. Today I've been thinking about the clients that I work with because I work a lot with women who are very self-aware, very high functioning, especially in the beginning parts of therapy. So if you're a woman who is very self-aware, right, that you can understand why you think, feel, behave the way that you do, and understand where your family dynamics come in, the kind of relationship that you might have with your parents, where your fears around romantic relationships come from, where your drive for being a high achiever might stem from, and why it's so important for you to be self-reliant and to not have to look to others for support, because that feels very, very uncomfortable. You might understand why that happens, but it might feel hard for you to move beyond understanding the why and moving into change, moving into different patterns, moving into showing up as more securely attached as opposed to being more avoidantly attached or more distant in a lot of your relationships. And even possibly showing up as anxious, even though you are very high functioning. A lot of the time that high functioning is fueled by anxiety, and that is often what keeps the drive up to, I suppose, work at such an intense level or to have such high expectations of yourself and to have signs around perfectionism and not wanting to get things wrong. It's often rooted in those anxious patterns, and because anxiety isn't necessarily thought of as something you can be high functioning in, it most definitely is, and it most definitely tends to be the root of where a lot of those patterns come from. If you are still very much in your reaction mode as opposed to changing the pattern, that is the gap that I'm going to be talking about today, so you understand why that is and what needs to happen for you to start to close that gap so that it moves from self-awareness into self-awareness, but then what the next stage of that is, which is embodiment and change, and integrating that into your nervous system and your nervous system responses and how you then behave and react and respond to things in the future. Because you can tend to get really frustrated and annoyed with yourself and think, I literally know why I'm doing all of this. I know these patterns and I know why it doesn't serve me. And I'm getting frustrated with myself because even though I know this stuff, I still can't change it. I still don't know what I need to do in order to stop behaving in the same way or to stop having the same relationship patterns. And the thing that's really frustrating about that is most of the women that I work with are not confused. They're not full of, I don't understand why I do this. They know this, but they're just tired of knowing and not being able to change. And the biggest reason for that is that your insight lives in your thinking brain, whereas your patterns, they live in your nervous system. And stress tends to pull you out of your logic. It tends to pull you out of your ability to problem solve or to think rationally. So that's why when you're triggered, you still end up going back to the same possibly childlike behaviours or behaviours that you know might be toxic or you know might be unhelpful or you know which puts distance between you and either the person that you want to be or your relationships. Self-awareness explains what's happening, but it doesn't stop the body from doing what it usually does when it's under pressure. And sometimes having that kind of insight and having that level of self-awareness, even in that, there's a form of either rigidity and control. You can start to overanalyze things. You can overanalyze yourself. you can start to self-monitor your responses. So really, because you have that level of self-awareness, you're trying to use that sometimes in the moment by almost filtering what you're going to say or how you're going to say it. And I suppose overthinking how you're going to respond, as opposed to reflecting back. It's almost coming from a place of fear and stress and not wanting to get it wrong, as opposed to just being authentic and being present in the moment and just relating with people in a way that feels authentic. And it's almost like you're trying to catch yourself before you react. And at some point, that self-awareness, it turns into self-policing, and it keeps your nervous system and your stress response still in high alert, because it's like you're trying to predict the threat. You're trying to predict the threat of disconnection or of losing your temper, or you're just really trying to be in control of your thoughts, your feelings and emotions. And when you're doing that in a self-policing way, it makes it hard for you to be more within your body. And I work with a lot of women who are also high achievers, and they tend to be high achievers because, one, they are very intelligent, but also because they've had to be very switched on to being able to almost have like an escape route. And sometimes education and being the best at things, being conforming, being like a model child, can come with a feeling of safety and acceptance. And so you can veer towards more of high achieving standards, because you recognize that when you are either conforming or when you're doing well, you're perhaps meeting the needs of your parents because of maybe cultural values and things around you have to be the best at what you do, or you have to have a very good job, you have to have success, you have to be able to earn good money. And when you perform that role and you're able to do that, and you're able to, do well at school as you're growing up, you're really able to apply yourself academically, or even just working for yourself. Because I see a lot of women who are high functioning and high achieving, but they don't necessarily conform to working just in a corporate environment. So they are either self-employed, or they're freelance, or they just work in a way that is not your typical 9 to 5. They kind of set their own schedule, and they kind of do things around entrepreneurship, different types of working environments. So high achieving can look like very different things. And I will also say that women who are high achieving, there are the sector of women who are high achieving and know they're high achieving, and then there are the set of women who are high achieving and would never describe themselves that way. And that's also because it's rooted in a lot of imposter syndrome, of not ever feeling good enough, not feeling like they've earned their position in spaces. So perhaps if maybe you've come from, say, like a working class background, or you don't feel as though you're as smart as like the smartest person in the room, even though you might be the smartest person in the room, sometimes it can feel hard for you to step into that position, because there is all this self-doubt that you have, and a feeling of people are going to find out that I'm not as smart as what they think I am. So it's almost like, on one hand, you know that you're brilliant in some ways, and that you think differently, and that you're smart and you're intellectual, but there's also a part of you that thinks, am I really good at my job? Can I really do this? If people knew the real me, if people knew the doubts that I have, they would probably realise that most of the time I haven't got a fucking clue what I'm doing. And so there's those two different subsets of high achieving women, the ones that know it and the ones that don't quite know it and don't identify as that. But the commonality in that is through nervous system dysregulation, which is often where the anxiety shows up. And it doesn't show up in the ways that you might assume it will show up. It often shows up in, not, like I was saying, like having the imposter syndrome, not feeling good enough, a lot of self-critical thoughts. So always being really hard on yourself, being really judgmental, That could be rooted in having very judgmental parents, but it could be something that you've kind of developed, you've picked up along the way as some form of self-protection. And so even though your parents might not have necessarily have been very critical of you, there is something in, because you were getting a lot of validation in achievement and overachievement, you've somehow equated your worth to what you can do as opposed to what you can be. And as an overthinker, you're going to spend a lot of time in your head, and as a result of that, that usually means that you're not as much in tune with your body. And so that is a lot of the work that has to go into moving away from self-awareness that's all up in the head, but it's also reconnecting with your body, because our nervous systems are obviously in our bodies. And so the more that we disconnect with that part of ourselves, and the more that we're in our heads, the harder it is to implement the change that comes after self-awareness. That's where embodiment is. That's where changing patterns lie. So it's not just in the logic of knowing what the patterns are, it's being more in your body so that you can make that connection and not be disconnected from what your physical responses are, and to not misread physiological cues. So misreading anxiety as a reason to not set a boundary, for example, or ignoring signs that your body might need rest because you've been pushing yourself and overexerting yourself. And often that's the work that's really difficult to do on your own. If you are listening to this and you're thinking, this is me, that's literally me that you're describing, the question isn't what you're missing, it's what can't be done alone when your nervous system is activated. So what do you do when you know exactly what's happening and it still doesn't stop? Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today's episode. I will catch you in the next one. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.